Hello, I'm Zonal here, and welcome to another video on the Tech Quest. Graphics cards come and go. Some are just plain bad, but others stand out even through the passage of time. We still speak of these legendary cards, the incredible 1080 Ti, the awesome GTX 580, well actually anything really 580. But for me, there's one special card in particular, a card that reignited my passion for PC gaming and one that served me faithfully for years. A piece of hardware so incredible, I still think about my time gaming with it today. I am talking about the nVidia GeForce 8800 GT. It's 2025, and from a hardware perspective, working 8800 GTs are few and far between, with the added bonus of working versions of those cards now oddly being scalped online. A good condition 8800 GT can set you back nearly £100 now, which is frankly insane. I did have other plans for this 8800 GT, and one that I'm still hoping to get around to, but I wanted to get a video done on this while the 8800 GT I own still works. These things are getting on, and I didn't want to leave this one to be lost to history. So let's get to it. The GeForce 8800 GT was released in late 2007, featuring 512MB of GDDR3 memory on a 256-bit bus. Its initial $249 price point was an absolute revelation in PC gaming. Here was a card that performed roughly on par with the much more expensive 8800 Ultra for a fraction of the price. This particular gigabyte model has a clock core of 700MHz, and memory at 920MHz, making it a slightly faster version of the 8800 GT. Drawing its power from a single 6-pin connector, the 8800 GT became the gold standard of price to performance, with it finding itself often paired up with the fastest and newest Core 2 Duos and Core 2 Quads of the day. If you were building an average budget PC in 2007 or 2008, there is no way you were buying anything other than an 8800 GT with a Core 2 processor. That's how good both of these things were. People use these things for years, I know I did, and the amount of hours the 8800 GT has clocked up gaming must still be unsurpassed to this day. By modern standards, its specifications are nothing remarkable, but the 8800 GT isn't really a modern card, so those modern standards don't really apply here. Back in the day, I had this paired with a Phenom 2X6 1055T, but today I've opted for something a little simpler, a Core i5-2400S. I won't be spending any time on the 2400S today, this will be featuring more depth shortly, but the i5-2400S is a quad-core processor that should feed our 8800 GT quite well. Coupled with 16 gigs of DDR3 memory clocked in at 1600MHz, with Windows and all games running from an SSD, we should get the best we can out of this aging king. I'm using the last drivers available for the 8800 GT, 342.01, and with this being a DX10 card, a lot of newer games I'd normally test simply will not run anymore. So think of this video more as a retrospective look rather than a review. With just 512MB of VRAM, we will see a few limitations crop up on game resolutions, but again, the 8800 GT can't really be judged by modern standards. This is after all an old card, and 1080p resolutions with ultra high frame rates were pretty luxury for most back in 2007. Nonetheless, I've gone as far as the 8800 will take us, and you'll be genuinely gobsmacked in some of the game's performance featured today. Just for a bit of fun, I will also be including the age of the GeForce 8800 GT at the times the games tested were released, so you can compare the performance you get considering the age of the card. The GeForce 8800 GT was released in October 2007 for reference. The full specs of this system I'm using today are on screen now. This certainly would have been a very decent setup back in its day. So without further delay, I present to you the 8800 GT in all of its glory. Metro Last Light is first. This is the Redux version released in 2014. At 720p and using the game's low settings, the 8800 GT still managed to deliver a playable, albeit fairly low resolution experience on Last Light's modernised touch-up. I've played through the entirety of the Echoes level, and despite its variable numbers here, the 8800 GT still well north of 30fps, easily outpacing the Xbox 360 original in performance. Sure, you do have to make some sacrifice for that tiny 512MB buffer, but you can still play it absolutely fine. Crysis 2 was a blast. At 720p and using the DX10 high setting, the 8800 GT had no problem powering us up to 60fps, even in heavy combat. I remember when these came out and the console versions were languishing in sub 30fps numbers at sub HD resolutions, and yet here's the 8800 GT, still good to go in Crysis 2. Really incredible stuff, and very similar to how I originally played Crysis 2 back on launch all those years ago. Left 4 Dead 2 now, it's still incredibly popular to this day, so I like including it in testing. At 1080p and using the medium preset, I could easily let the footage do all the talking for itself. 60fps, at 1080p with not a problem in sight. It's not just playable, at that 60fps target, the 8800 GT is still absolutely flawless in its delivery. I played through the entirety of the Streets level, as I normally do, and I had a great time. Also still very popular, Payday 2. At 900p with a mixture of settings, the 8800 GT once again did itself proud. I played through a combat heavy heist, and the 8800 GT was almost rock solid in its delivery. There were a few occasional dips towards the high 50s as the 8800 maxed out, but it didn't interrupt the flow of the game at all, and that all important 60 target was met almost the entire time. I did try nudging the resolution up to 1080p after this heist, but that did prove a little bit too much for the 8800 GT to handle, so 900p here was a pretty good balance. Sniper Elite V2, a game I know lifed on the 8800 GT back in the day, point blank refused to work this time around. A shame, because I do remember it performing very well. Fallout New Vegas was pretty great. At 1080p low, the 8800 GT had no problems with this one and reached 60fps, with the only deviations from this being Bethesda's infamous engine, interrupting an otherwise smooth experience. It was great all around. As was Skyrim Original. At 1080p low, it's a similar story to Fallout New Vegas. It ran well most of the time, and thanks to that 1080p resolution, it looked pretty sharp too. Once again, the only interruptions to the experience being the game engine Skyrim is based on. BioShock Infinite is a game about choices, and those choices extend into how you like your presentation. I tested this on low at both 720p and 1080p, with the former providing you with a mostly 60fps experience, but at the same time, the 8800 GT will handle 1080p at 30fps just fine too. More frames or sharper presentation, you need not worry, the 8800 still has you either way. Personally, I'd normally go for the higher frames, but BioShock Infinite's aesthetic presentation deserves admiration. Battlefield 4 is next. At 720p and using the low preset, the aging 8800 GT still delivered a result better than the Xbox One version of the game. It wasn't a steady 60fps right the way through, but it was consistent enough that those dips into the low 50s didn't interrupt your gaming time. If you played the Xbox One version of this at launch like I did, you'll know how impressive it is that the 8800 GT outpaced it even with its age. I did try to run GTA 5 Legacy for this test, but the kernel level anti-cheat caused me no end of problems when I was trying to use the 8800. Yet worked fine when I swapped in an RTX 2060. Strange. BioShock 2 at 1080p low ran great, although Afterburner wouldn't provide any statistics here, so I'm afraid you'll have to rely on your eyes and take my word for it. But I played for around half an hour without a single issue. It's a remarkable game and one I really should replay again. Rage was superb. At 900p and using the default settings, the 8800 GT had no problem at all hitting that 60fps target. And some of you may be as old as me and also remember how notorious this game was at the time for hardware performance. Yet the 8800 GT just breezes through without a care in the world. I did up the resolution after this recording, but 1080p was once again a stretch too far for the 8800 GT, and 900p was definitely the sweet spot here. Moving on to Dirt 3's in-game bench run, and again the results here speak for themselves. At 1080p low, the 8800 GT made light work of Dirt 3. To ensure I wasn't being given a choice cut in the benchmarking, I also had a couple of races after this, and it really does play like this. Absolutely smooth sailing all the way through. Or, well, driving. The original Dead Island now at 900p medium. This is one game in particular I played a lot of on the 8800 GT, and its performance broadly aligns with how I remember it playing. Larger open areas would see a 50fps or so frame rate, with inside areas having no problem reaching 60. Like Battlefield though, it was consistent, and I feel that you can often get by in the mid-50s, as long as the performance is consistent. In Dead Island's case, it was. It's a similar story for Saints Row 4 Re-elected. At 720p medium, the 8800 GT delivered a better than 360 experience overall, although it wasn't quite at that 60fps mark I was aiming for. With that said though, it only just fell short, and Saints Row 4 Re-elected was still a great time on the 8800 GT. This card is 18 years old, and it still performs like this. A few more games to go, one of which is Half-Life 2. At 1080p high, the 8800 GT performed flawlessly, which is all the more impressive when you consider the evolving requirements of Half-Life 2 over the years. Today's Half-Life 2 wouldn't run very well on its original hardware requirements. The 8800 though, it just keeps on keeping on. Borderlands 2 had some minor issues, and it's hard to narrow down where the problem is here exactly. I played this on the 8800 back in the day, and I do recall it performing better than this. At 720p medium, the 8800 GT wasn't very consistent this time around. It could be driver related or update related, but I'm more inclined to believe that the problem here is the age of the card. It played better in my memory, but the modern day experience isn't particularly satisfying. I played the introduction to Far Cry 2, probably an unpopular opinion, but I really didn't like this one compared to the later Far Cries, so I never really invested much time on it on my 8800 GT. This time around though, 1080p, medium, pretty good all around, and leaps and bounds above the quality of the at the time console versions. Saints Row 3 had some minor issues, but it was mostly okay. At 720p low, there was the occasional stutter that I feel did interrupt the experience. But like Borderlands, it's difficult to nail down where the problem is when the hardware powering it outside of the 8800 is still solid, as you will see in an upcoming video about 2400S. I played this for a little while, and while I did have an okay time, there were some problems with this one. For our penultimate game, something a little newer. Unbelievably, Supermarket Simulator runs on the 8800 GT in 2025. There's no denying that it doesn't look particularly good, and performance is a bit hit and miss alongside the textures doing a disappearing act. But here's a game from 2025 running on an 8800 GT. I'm honestly amazed that it performed as well as it did, even if ultimately it couldn't be played like this. And finally, another more modern game, Utopia Must Fall. I left this one at the cheap preset, and the 8800 GT works surprisingly well on this much newer title. I know what you're thinking, it's easy to run an arcade style game on the 8800 GT, but I'll counter it with the fact that the game itself must still be able to actually use the 8800 GT with its graphics calls. So just because it doesn't look like £1,000,000 doesn't take away from the fact that the 8800 GT still has the ability to actually play it in the first place. Utopia Must Fall was excellent on the 8800 overall, and I had a fun time on this one. It ran great. Well, it's been a long one, but that's a wrap for today. The 8800 GT then. It's obviously not a card you should go out and buy today. In fact, I'd actually recommend against that. Not only is pricing for working models getting outrageous, but if you're looking to build a retro PC, you'd probably be better served by something Team Red like the HD 5000 series. If you do buy one, you're honestly gambling a little at this point. These cards are now old enough to vote by themselves, and hardware failure cannot be too far around the corner. Even my Gigabyte card I used today has started making failure noises during day 3 of testing that makes me think it probably doesn't have that many more hours in it, although I will try and stave off the inevitable by taking it apart and applying some TLC. But I wanted to make this video because this incredible piece of hardware holds more than just video memory on it. The 8800 GT changed my gaming direction and reignited a passion for PC gaming that, if I'm honest with you, I'd lost in my early 20s and didn't think would return. The 8800 GT brought back PC gaming for me, and I've never looked back since the day I got this incredible card. It's not up to much in the modern day, but the profound impact this card had on me cannot be understated. It's been well over a decade since I was last near an 8800, but it still occupies my memories, and it is still brought up fondly in conversation with the same friends that the 8800 GT enabled me to play the big games with for years. So this hasn't been a review. Those of you who used one back in the day will already know all of the things I've said here, and will likely have their own fond memories of their 8800 GTs. In fact, I want to hear them, so please feel free to share, and I will try and get back to them all. I've been Zonofair, and this has been my homage to the greatest graphics card of all time. Thank you for watching. Until next time, bye bye.